Hello everyone, and welcome to Monty's Match Analysis. In this new series, we'll be learning Squad from a bird's eye view. Each episode will explore a match of Squad, and break it down to its bare essentials. Over the course of the match, I'll provide valuable insight and analysis on each and every winning play or mistake that will ultimately lead both teams to their glorious victory or humiliating capitulation. Most importantly, we'll break down squad concepts and tactics that you can use in your own matches, whether you're a squad leader or a lowly rifleman. Let's kick off the series with a classic, Chora, with the Russian ground forces on the west and the People's Liberation Army on the east. Chora is an iconic squad map known for its visceral close quarters combat and small size. The map's many compounds, stone walls, and channels allow for many paths infantry can use to sneak into and around enemy positions, making it difficult to shut down enemy flanks, although due to the map size, many of these paths will be contested and will ultimately come down to a slog of an infantry fight. Both sides of the river, the northern and southern lanes respectively, must be played in order for either side to prevent being flanked. However, if the defending side can maintain the map control on both lanes, the attacking team will be forced into a costly frontal assault. So the name of the game is to fight not just for the map objectives, but also the flanks of these objectives. This is the basic concept of map control. Keep that in mind as we watch the match unfold. For vehicles, the PLA gained 3 CSK light vehicles with 2 open-top machine guns, the other with an RWS machine gun. They also get a transport with a machine gun mounted on top and a ZBD-04 infantry fighting vehicle. On the Russian ground forces, they have 3 Tigers equipped with 2 open-top HMGs and 1 RWS machine gun, as well as a BMP-2 for their infantry fighting vehicle. This layer has 6 objectives, both sides gaining 3 respectively. The main objectives today will be the Russians' Lower Orchard and the PLA's radio station, both being very difficult to take once the defender entrenches. With that out of the way, let's start the match. Now the rollout is the most important part of the match. It's when both sides set up their spawns, backcap their objectives, and establish and fight for map control. At the start, we see both sides understand just how important controlling the northern lane is, even if there's no objectives there, with RGF sending Squad 4 and Squad 6, and the PLA sending Squad 3's CSK and Squad 5 to the north. Meanwhile, RGF's Squad 2, 3, and 5 moves to secure their main objective, Lower Orchard. Squad 7, backcaps, and Squad 6 and 7's Tigers push ahead to assist Lower Orchard. The PLA likewise rushes to cap their main objective, Radio Station, with Squad 6 and 3's CSK and Squad 4's Logi and Infantry. Looking back up north, the Russian Squad 4 dismounts and starts to push to their FOB creation mark, while PLA's Squad 3 CSK goes hunting for transport and logistics trucks. We also see PLA's Squad 5 pushing north to hug the northern border of the map, possibly trying to get a jump on any would-be Russian attack FOBs on Radio Station. We see that the PLA CSK narrowly misses Squad 6's full truck, a close call for the RGF. This CSK's mistake provides our first lesson, light vehicles and their role. During the early game or rollout phase, your light vehicles, especially on small maps like these, should be aggressively hunting enemy transport and logistics vehicles. Doing so successfully can kneecap an enemy team early on. Jumping ahead, both teams have now dismounted their infantry and the first FOBs are coming up. We can see the prelude to a fight to the northern lane popping up as well, with the RGF dedicating 2 squads of infantry while the PLA only send a paltry 6 men. In the south, we see the PLA have already secured Radio Station while the RGF are dragging their feet a bit on Lower Orchard. Nevertheless, the RGF infantry are near and in force, ready to begin pressuring Radio Station. The Russians get up their first FOB, not on Lower Orchard, but rather just to the west of it, with just enough space to place another FOB on Lower Orchard later. The PLA themselves opt for a single HAB on Radio Station. We can see both teams barreling towards each other in the south inside the channel flowing around Radio Station. Now, while the match plays out, remember what I said earlier. The key for both sides is to maintain and control both lanes, not just the south. This allows the winner to flank and encircle the enemy's objective. We'll see how this plays out. The two sides clash and the front lines are being established as I speak. The Russians establish a northern FOB with already 2 full squads placing rallies and establishing map control on the northern side. At this moment, RGF has a decisive advantage in the northern lane, although the PLA's IFE is on its way to assist. In the south, the fight predictably muddies down to a slog, both sides fighting for mere inches of ground. Remember that at this moment, neither side is at a disadvantage or advantage in terms of caps, so it's up to either team whether they want to push or turtle up on their respective objectives. Chris Webb gives us our next lesson from this match. Using his RWS light vehicle, he effectively locks down much of the southern border of Chora by using a tactic known as holing down, the concept of hiding most of your vehicle behind cover with just your turret peeking out to minimize exposure. It helps that even if Chris Webb's vehicle was hidden the turret, he would not take any hull damage, although it would disable the turret. Meanwhile, up north, we can see the battle for the north is in full swing, with just 6 PLA soldiers doing remarkably well against RGF's 2 squads of infantry. Meanwhile, it seems that the Russians believe their hab in the north is no longer worth it and is digging it down. Now it seems the PLA are starting to realize they're being overrun in the north, sending Squad 7 in a transport to try and stem the Russian tide. Meanwhile, we can see that Squad 5 is doing all they can to hold the northern border of Chora, because if they can just hold out here, this prevents the Russians from really establishing themselves on the northern side. They'll constantly be worried about the PLA flanking them and digging down their habs and killing their rallies. So this is a great play by Squad 5, just being a total pain in the ass to the Russians and keeping them from establishing dominance over the northern side, delaying them as long as possible until reinforcements come. But look at Squad 6 and how they are exploiting this gap in the PLA's front line. PLA infantry have just dismounted and are trying to close that gap, but it may be too little too late. Let's see how it plays out. Again, we can see the Russian flank starting to happen around radio station, and the PLA are just charging in and trying to stop it. And now you can see that the PLA have just lost their last few soldiers to the north of radio station, and you have almost 2 full Russian squads going to now constantly pressure from the north and trying to get around radio as well. Now, don't count the PLA out yet, because while the Russians are getting the upper hand, the PLA still have very strong control over radio station proper, and it's going to be an absolute slog for the Russians to take, even with the Russians owning the north. Now we freeze frame because I want to talk to you a little bit about the small squad of PLA soldiers that have been behind the Russian lines for a while now. As long as they're behind Russian lines, they can burn Russian rallies, proxy fobs, and just generally force the Russians to look more than one direction. Which is why I affectionately refer to these players as rats, just getting in behind the walls and gnawing on the logistical wires of the Russian defense. Here we can see Squeeze My Lemon taking his squad around the southernmost route, trying to get around radio station, but we will see soon how that works out. It's very easy to shut down these kinds of routes with just 1 or 2 players. Now take a look at PLA Squad 5 again in the north. Thanks to him, the Russians' hold has been weakened on the north side because he and his buddy have just ran through these compounds and gotten rid of Squad 6's rally, and also at least temporarily down Squad 6's leader too. Once again, Squad 5 is just delaying, doing his best to try and hold the north, even when it seems like the PLA have lost the north forever. You may be wondering why the PLA's hab is going down in radio station. Well, that's because they've put the hab out in the open and the Russian mortars are whittling it down. This is actually a huge issue for the PLA, because this is their main defensive hab. It's actually their only hab at the moment. So, as these mortars slowly degrade the hab, the PLA are going to have to periodically dig it back up. And that's going to cause big delays in spawning. So, here's a big lesson for USLs out there. Put your fobs inside if at all possible. And now we can see that the valiant flank of Squeeze My Lemon has stalled. It only really takes 1 or 2 guys looking their way, and their advance has now completely stalled out. So I've been praising the PLA's Squad 5 all video because he has been one of the few squads actually trying to hold the north for the PLA, and he has successfully delayed the Russian advance and weakened it at every opportunity. But here's where he possibly strays from the path. He's got to rally up behind the Russians, and he now has the opportunity to go up north and burn rallies, forcing the Russians to look west. But instead of doing that, he's looking to the south, thinking about flanking and taking that F9 Russian fob. Let's see if it works out for him. So I have to apologize, I was having some kind of weird glitch, but coming back in, I just have to freeze frame because oh my god, the match has just completely changed in the span of like 2 minutes. We see PLA Squad 5 has made the decision to cross his Rubicon and is actively pushing the Russian Western mortar fob to great effect. And that's not all. For whatever reason, the Russians have just been completely pushed out of the northern radio station channel, and a lot of the Russians are starting to get pushed into Lower Orchard. The Russians to the east of Lower Orchard maintain some sense of map control overlooking these fields and have the opportunity to pressure both radio station from the south and help Lower Orchard if needed. Meanwhile, the Russian squads 4 and 6 have crossed the river, and 6 is actually in Lavender Estate itself. So overall, both teams' defensive positions are quickly becoming unsustainable, and well, let's see who comes out on top. You can see both sides are starting to realize their situation. The PLA are pushing hard around the north of Orchard, taking full advantage of this gap in the Russian line, trying to pressure both the Russian mortar fob and Lower Orchard itself, while the Russians are divided half on the north side of radio station and half defending the southern border of Chora. So, who has the advantage here? Well, at first glance, the PLA does, because they are a lot closer to the Russian fobs and have more map control on the south. But I also want you to pay attention to this. If it wasn't for this massive PLA bulge, then the Russians almost have a radio station encircled. So, at this point, it's a race. The PLA to rush down these habs, and the Russians to tighten the noose around radio station. This is the make or break moment for both teams here. Whoever wins this race, wins the game. Checking back into the front, the PLA are in the Russian mortar fob and digging it down, and it seems that the Russians can't do anything about this at all. There's no rallies or fobs for them besides Lower Orchard, and there's too many PLA in between them to stop it, so that hab is a goner. That's really important because look at the tickets. Both teams are roughly even, so radios can definitely make a difference. That is 20 tickets for the PLA right then and there. But I want you to look at Lower Orchard because the Russians are not giving up. They are pushing out of Lower Orchard and giving the Russians a run for their money. Also take a look at the Russian Squad 7 and 8's rallies. Even if this hab goes down, they still have a backup that could save the day. Additionally, look at Russian Squad 3. They've actually snuck their way behind radio station southeast, and look at that. It may not be all filled with players yet, but that is officially an encirclement by the Russian team on radio station. The only question is, can they keep Lower Orchard? Because Lower Orchard is almost encircled as well by the PLA. You can see now that the PLA are on Lower Orchard and proxying that Russian fob, but here is where you gotta remember just how important rallies are in squad. Look at Russian Squad 7 and 8 and their rallies and watch them flood in there as only a Chinese light vehicle and 3 or 4 PLA soldiers try to defend against 2 Russian squads spawning in on their rallies. Here's one of the most important lessons I can teach you. If you don't have a rally up, place one immediately, because this is what happens. Yeah, those PLA soldiers did great proxying that hab for as long as humanly possible, but when there is 10 guys versus 2, well, you can imagine what's going to happen, and now it's just a matter of cleaning up the stragglers for the Russians on Orchard. Now let's take a look at the map and you can see how the turn tables. The PLA are trapped inside radio station, half the team is huddled together, and the Russians have almost completely surrounded radio station. The noose is tightened, and spoiler alert, this is the beginning of the end for the PLA team. And now we see the PLA team having control only of the immediate radio station compound as that noose slowly tightens. Now let's take our attention back to Squad 5 for a second. He is again behind enemy lines and forcing a not so insignificant part of the Russian team to defend Lower Orchard and chase after his squad. He is ratting hard. He is burning rallies, he's stopping logistics from coming in, he's blowing up vehicles, and he is again forcing the Russians to defend Lower Orchard. Just a phenomenal play on his part, even as the Titanic is sinking. Now, the next couple of minutes is gonna be a slog, but the fate of the match has largely been decided. The Russians will slowly advance until the PLA hab is being proxied, and then the match will largely be over. The PLA could re-establish themselves on lavender farms, but the ticket loss from losing a radio and a capture point and all the players defending it is too much of a blow for them to win this game. Although, as you'll see, they'll largely give up right around here. And it's here that the Russians close the distance enough to proxy the PLA HAP. The PLA can't get troops into the fight anymore, and the defenders prepare for a last stand. And there we have it. It's the last stand at the Bastille. It's the last day at the Alamo. And the PLA are going to lose radio station, and that's game. So, key takeaways. 1. Rat tactics. Just a couple guys behind that front line can do wonders for your team. Burning rallies, ambushing logistics, digging down radios, and distracting the enemy is well worth the effort. Don't be shy. Chew on those logistical cables and get into the enemy's head. Hold down and light vehicle tactics. Rush your light vehicles into areas enemies are likely to place their HABs, and ambush those logistics trucks. Secondly, later on into the game, hold down your vehicle and lock down entire areas for your team, as Chris Webb did so brilliantly. Most importantly, remember that staying on the objective is what captures it, but owning the area around the objective is what holds it. Map control is important, and you should be constantly fighting to control and maintain it. The PLA team gave up the north lane, and that ended up costing them the game. If they had continued fighting up north and didn't overextend into Lower Orchard, the results may have been different. Thanks for watching. This is definitely an experimental series, so if you have any suggestions or critiques, feel free to tell me in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe for more. That's all I got for you. Peace.